Happy Resurrection Sunday, or Good Friday, Easter Sunday, whatever you might want to call it. No, today is Happy Resurrection Sunday, or Easter Sunday as we call it. And it certainly is a day of celebration. It certainly is a day where we can celebrate because it is an amazing day when we think about what Jesus did. Despite what's gone on in your week, maybe this week hasn't been the best. Maybe there's some things going to happen and you think, how can it be a celebration? Well, maybe what's going on in your life at the moment isn't the best, but certainly what Jesus did and what Jesus' death from being dead for 3 days and the fact that he came alive is certainly something to celebrate. Let's read this morning John chapter 19. Let's have a look at John 19, starting at verse 38, and just to again read the story of Jesus' resurrection. It says, later, Joseph of Arimathea asked Pilate for the body of Jesus. Now, Joseph was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly, because he feared the Jewish leaders, with Pilate's permission, he came and took the body away. He was accompanied by Nicodemus, the man who earlier had visited Jesus at night. Nicodemus brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds. Taking Jesus' body, the two of them then wrapped it with the spices in strips of linen. This was in accordance with Jewish burial customs. And at the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. Because it was a Jewish day of preparation, and since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there. Chapter 20. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one who Jesus loved. We know him as John. And said, they have taken the Lord out of the tomb and we don't know where they've put him. So Peter and the other disciple, that's John, started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple, John, outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and he looked in at the strips of linen that were lying there, but he did not go in. And then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb, and he saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went inside. He saw and he believed. They still did not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to where they were staying. What an interesting story. And there is it's a thing of celebration. It's a story of two men who run after Mary comes to them, and they find Jesus and they find his clothing that he'd been wrapped in left behind. And I had just one of those thoughts as I was reading this passage, as I was preparing for this message today, and I thought to myself, we don't normally talk about clothes that people are going to be buried in. I've never been in a family event. I've never been with friends. We've ever talked about, are you going to wear a tie? Are you going to wear a shirt? Are you going to wear shorts? Are you going to wear your favourite boxes? What are you going to wear when you're buried? Even kind of talking about it seems a little bit kind of morose, a little bit, why are we talking about dying? Why are we talking about... We don't like talking about death, and we particularly don't like talking about what we're going to wear. It's not something we think about. Usually the choice is made by the people who are left behind, by the wife or the husband or the children or the family or someone or a friend who says they love this outfit. But it's not something that we talk a lot about. What are you going to be buried in? I did have another thought, and yes, this is a dad joke or a Ron Mitchell joke, but if there was a shop that sold clothes for people to be buried in, I think a great slogan could be clothes to die in. Yeah, I did say that was a dad joke, but I thought that was a good one. You're obviously not laughing. Anyway, also when I attend a funeral, I don't spend a lot of time looking at what the person wore. In fact, if you said to me the last funeral you went to, what did the person have on? What were they wearing as they laid in that casket? It's not something that I take a lot of attention to. But John, the one who writes this passage, he talks a lot about what Jesus was buried in. He spends a lot of time describing how they wrapped Jesus. He talks a lot about what happens when they go back and they find this clothing on the floor. He spends a lot of time talking about the clothing. And I'm glad he does. I really am, because in doing so, John is reminding us. He's reminding us and showing us that the burial clothes that once spelled tragedy. Jesus was dead. They wrapped him as they did as part of the custom, and they put spices, and they made him smell nice, and they wrapped him up in fine linen. That same sentiment of sadness, that sentiment of someone they loved being dead, something that spelled tragedy for Jesus' disciples, actually later represented triumph and life as they looked in that tomb and they saw this clothing all over the ground. That what they originally looked at as something sad, they then saw as something, wow, Jesus is alive. It was something good. It was something to celebrate. We've all received and remember symbols of bad news. Might have been that phone call or that text message or that letter or that email you got that just broke you in two. Maybe it's that ID bracelet that you got from hospital for that traumatic accident that you had or sickness, and it still sits in your bedside cupboard. Maybe it's that limp that you carry after that accident that continually reminds you of that incident that changed your whole life. Maybe it's that divorce certificate that sits in your filing cabinet. All things of life which are symbols and cause us to remember bad times, bad days. And as the disciples watched Jesus being wrapped in the burial clothes, all their hope would have been gone. It would have been a sad day. It would have been a visual reminder as they were wrapping Jesus of what had happened. Jesus was dead. Their future was gone. Their friend was dead. And now he was wrapped in cloths and he was put behind a huge rock. It was a symbol of defeat for them. It was a symbol of failure. It was a symbol of loss. But those same clothes that he was wrapped in after Jesus rose, these same now discarded clothes, now reminded Jesus' disciples of his power, of what he could do, that he couldn't be kept down. And those moments, those sad moments that Jesus could turn around into something powerful, he could turn into triumph. In John chapter 20, verse 8, we see that the power of Jesus' discarded clothes for John, that it says he saw and he believed. He looked at those clothes, and those clothes to him said, he is alive. He did what he said he was going to do. It was a good news thing. Those clothes that he looked at, he thought, God, from great sadness, from great trouble, has now become great triumph. John didn't know on that Friday. I can tell you now what we know now. When he was on that Friday, he thought Jesus was dead. He thought Jesus wasn't coming back. John didn't know that Friday's tragedy would be Sunday's triumph. He didn't know that it wasn't going to end there. He didn't know that Friday was he thought it was a full stop. In fact, it was a comma, that Jesus was coming back and that great things would happen. Can I encourage you that maybe you're facing a symbol of bad news today? Maybe, as I said, Resurrection Sunday or Easter Sunday, whatever you call it, that maybe it's not something that you would say, well, it's a real good day to celebrate. Maybe you have lost your job. Maybe you've lost a loved one in this last week or two. Maybe something's happened and your bank account has got low and you just think, what am I going to do? Maybe it is to you like Jesus being wrapped in that clothing, that you feel like everything's lost, everything's gone, you're living in disappointment. What looks like the end is not the end, can I tell you that? It's not the end. It sure may look like it, it sure may feel like it, but Jesus is someone who we can trust for triumph. The other thought that I had when I was reading this passage was this. When I read it and saw what John did, when he was faced with this symbol of bad news, John did something that I think is incredibly significant and something we all need to do when we are facing a situation of great tragedy or trial. We see in John 20 verse 2, while it doesn't say it explicitly, we see that while Jesus was buried, that John stayed close. He stayed close. Why do I say that? Well, it doesn't particularly say that he stayed close to the tomb. But what was What did John do on Easter Saturday? What was he doing on Easter Saturday? Because he could have ran away. He could have gone to another country. He could have been scared for his life. He could have been in such sadness. He said, I'm just going to get away. I'm just going to go as far away from here as I can. He could have gone into isolation where nobody could find him and said, I'm checking out on life. This is just too hard to deal with. What did John do on Easter Saturday? Well, I believe he stuck close. I believe that John stayed close, even in the midst of tragedy. He stuck close to where Jesus was. He stuck close to Jesus. Why do I say that? Because when Mary ran back, the first two people she found was John and Simon Peter. They were obviously close enough for her to go straight to them. They weren't a long way off. She didn't have to go looking for them. They stayed close. John stayed close. And so my question of each of us today is, what do you do in the face of tragedy? What are you doing right now with what you're facing? You see, we have some options. We can distance ourselves from Jesus. We can pull away. We can get upset. We can blame him. Or we can linger near him. We can linger and we can stay close because we know that if anyone's got our back, if anything can happen, we need Jesus. And to be where he is the safest and the best place to be. Do we get upset at God? Or do we push closer into his presence for his strength and comfort? Can I encourage you to be a John? Can I encourage you to have that same sentiment of when things look bad, he didn't run, he didn't hide, he didn't get upset. He stayed close. He stayed close. Hang around. See what God can do through it. See the discarded clothes lying on the ground as later on you see the victory. As you see a victory that comes out of an incredibly sad situation. The person may never come back and you miss them. You may never get that job back. But I truly believe that out of the tragedy, you will find triumph as we stay close to Jesus. In Romans 8:28 it says this, in everything God works for the good of those who love him. In everything. Not just the good things, not just the things where you've got lots of money and lots of friends and great jobs, great when everything's going well, but in the bad and the good. In everything we can trust that it will work for the good of those who love him. We can replace that word everything with something bad. In scars, God works for the good. In the loss of my job, God works for the good. In my diagnosis, God works for the good. So as I conclude this morning, can I just ask you this? Have you moved? Have you got upset at God? Are you living in fear? Something's happened and legitimately it causes you pain, and I'm not taking away the fact that it hurts. But can I encourage you that when you want to run away, the best place to be, the best place where you will see victory and you'll see God come through in whatever way that looks like in triumph, is when we linger. It's when we stay close to him, when we push closer to him. Because Sunday's coming. Sunday's coming. And what we do on Easter Saturday, the equivalent of Easter Saturday in our lives, that time between the tragedy and the triumph is so important. Push in. Linger. Get closer to him. All of us get anxious. All of us fear. All of us get worried. All of us have pain. But it's what we do with that pain that counts. Do we run? Do we let it ferment inside of us? Do we get ulcers? Or do we push closer to Jesus? Jesus bled for you. He took a spear for you. He bore the nails for you. He defeated death for you. That is his commitment to you. That in the tragedy of death, in the tragedy of Good Friday, we can see an Easter Sunday. We can see a Resurrection Sunday. God wants us to stay close to him, to trust in him, to wait and to watch. To wait for him, to watch for him, to watch what he's doing. Don't run away. John 14 verse 1 says this, do not let your hearts be troubled. And I really believe that is God's voice speaking to you this morning. Don't let your hearts be troubled. Whatever is going on, don't let your heart be troubled. So as we finish Resurrection Sunday, maybe you're sitting in your lounge room, maybe you're sitting somewhere else in the house by yourself, or you're sitting with your family, maybe you're sitting on your back deck. I don't know where you are, but I just want to encourage you, don't run off quite yet. I want you to take some time to reflect. Take some time to reflect on what you're doing and how you're going at the moment. What's going on in your life? What are some struggles? Where is God in your life? Have you pulled back? Have you kind of tried to struggle and work through life yourself, or are you pushing in? Are you getting close? Are you saying, God, you have all I need, you have all I've got, and I will trust in you, I will stay close. Sunday is coming. Sunday is coming. Don't lose sight of God. Just spend some time right now, just while we're finished, just sit. Maybe talk to your kids. Talk to your kids about what's been going on, and as a family or whatever it might be, pray together and say, God, I trust in you. I make the decision I will not run. I will linger. I will come closer. Bless you.